In this video, I'm going to be presenting on Network DevOps Transformation, and it's going to be a discussion around DevOps terminology, roles, and strategy. I gave a presentation on DevOps terminology, roles, and strategy to a group of leaders in the networking group of my employer. The purpose of the presentation was to engage in open dialogue and support facilitating the path to a successful DevOps transformation for our different network teams. The catalyst for my presentation was based on understanding who would be assigned to some very technical specific DevOps roles. I took some time to put together this slide deck here, discussing these different general DevOps topics, which did lead to a very fruitful conversation during our call. Based on the dialogue and feedback that I had received from the presentation, it was apparent that there was definitely a much clearer understanding amongst the group on what a network DevOps transformation might look like for our specific scenario, which is why I'm happy to present somewhat of a mock-up of what I did for that in this video for you today. Before we jump in, I'm just going to hop over to my runbooks, my technical blog here called Jenna's Runbooks. And this particular article called Network DevOps Transformation is under the DevOps section of my runbooks and under concepts here. And within it, I just give a brief overview of the purpose of the presentation, a little bit of the background, and links to the presentation itself, which I'll be including the YouTube video here for, as well as the slide deck for the PowerPoint presentation in PDF format. You can also get the PowerPoint presentation itself in the same repository, but for a quick view, the PDF is nice and simplified for you to view. So kind of back to, we already kind of touched on the purpose of this, but the background for the presentation was that over the last few months prior to the presentation that I gave, a small group of us had embarked on a journey into very uncharted territories with goals to design a complete CI/CD infrastructure using Azure DevOps. And we ended up building out that architecture completely from scratch with hardly any background on how, Azure DevOps special features like release pipelines and repositories and wikis worked. So we kind of got together, and really the key driver for that was automating an upcoming deployment for a global cloud firewall solution, which we were going to be hosting in all of our different landing zones. And landing zones are basically cloud support teams, support and design and solution teams for our different cloud providers. We were highly collaborative amongst ourselves in this small group to design the CI/CD infrastructure. And we also did seek out some valuable insight from other teams that did have experience, and we were able to kind of get an idea of a framework of where we were going with this to build this out. The next major task for us was to train up our network support teams on how to use all of this infrastructure that we ourselves had to quickly learn and then build and then turn back around and train our network support teams who were very, very new to a lot of DevOps concepts. With our teams, we ended up holding weekly and monthly demos. We'd review ADO Git, how Git works, how to create branches and make changes to code and push out commits and pull requests, and how pull requests are reviewed and how repositories are managed. And in addition, the whole structure of the Azure DevOps or ADO Wiki design for all of our different landing zones, because we're managing 4 different clouds. So we have Azure, AWS, Oracle, and Google Cloud. So managing all 4 vendors and organizing it in a way that's very friendly to our network support teams to know exactly where to go, as well as the build and release pipelines which get hooked into all of this. We built out lab environments for the different cloud providers, and we encouraged a learning environment within the different network teams. So flipping back over to the actual presentation itself, the purpose of it was to create a mock-up to share what we put together here, what I put together, and what we learned collectively through this presentation. This presentation, it's all publicly available information that I found in my research. I do cite my sources on the last slide towards the end, the second to last slide. And those were sources that I found very useful in kind of quickly putting together these concepts to drive our CI/CD, architecture and design forward, and incorporating our different teams to have a role in our DevOps strategy. So the agenda for the presentation today, we're going to talk about what is DevOps. I feel like that's a really great place to start defining exactly what that means so that we're all on the same page. Then we're going to talk about DevOps transformation roles, and these are going to be more broad roles, more like we're going to talk about two different high-level groups, one from a leadership perspective and one from a more core technical perspective. Then we're going to talk about what is the goal, what's the ultimate goal with the DevOps transformation. And then we're going to get into those specific technical DevOps roles, which were kind of the catalysts for putting together this presentation. And we'll kind of go over the path to success and offshoot from that with next steps. And obviously, we're not going to have a collaborative call here like I did originally for the presentation, but any questions that you have, feel free to drop them in the YouTube comments below and I'll answer them. And with that, additionally, I'll add a link to this article in the show notes of the YouTube video, where you'll also have access to the link to the slide deck itself if you found it useful. So what is DevOps? It's always nice to break down, let's start from the ground up. What is it? What does that mean? It can be kind of, a term that just gets thrown around a lot, but let's really break it down. DevOps brings together the development and operations group for a faster, more accurate, and more responsive software delivery experience. Success relies heavily on collaboration between all team members involved in a particular project, and that can be collaboration within your core team itself, but also collaboration outside of your team with different groups and different members of teams, because what I've found is that we can all learn from each other, and we can all have, different experiences that we can bring together to improve like any project that we're working on. The DevOps approach encourages more collaboration. So there's that collaboration word again, between the operations and the development teams, ensuring everyone's objectives are more aligned. So what does the development word in DevOps mean? Primary objective is to convert ideas into a product that solves end user problems. It entails requirements gathering, design, development, testing, backlog refinement. So you're going through, for example, Azure DevOps ADO, you have a backlog there. You're cleaning up stories and features. You're refining what that ADO backlog looks like in order to ensure that you're continuously putting out, what's needed. Ensuring continuous delivery of your products. So I see it as kind of like a train that's always moving forward. You're doing whatever you can to get any of those roadblocks out of the way to keep that train pushing forward. So what about the ops in DevOps? What is the ops? Primary objective is to deploy the product and manage it throughout the product's life. That includes configuration management, and I said specifically here for network gear because that's what we've been focused on. You're managing outages, so incidents, P1 incidents or Sev1 incidents. You're getting on those calls and you're troubleshooting to figure out what happened, what went wrong. You're managing backups of iOS's images and configuration backups, and security. And then ultimately, deployment and maintenance. So deployment of new solutions. So the solutions that the development team is working on architecting and designing, the operations side of that would assist with deploying the actual solution for that. From a networking perspective, we traditionally come from an operations background. So this side of DevOps is more familiar to us. So we're going to talk about the two high-level groups here that kind of help push forth the transformation in a network DevOps transformation. We're going to look at transformational leadership and the kernel team. So first off, transformational leadership. Who are they? It's pretty self-explanatory. These are going to be more managers. They're more people management type of roles. Managers focused on the growth of their employees and their teams. They create a vision of a better path forward for the organization. They help to inspire and motivate their employees and their teams. And they're reformers who can explain the why behind DevOps. And they're DevOps culture builders. So these are folks that are going to encourage teams, especially like more operational foundation types of teams like network teams on why would we want to do DevOps? Why would I want to take time out of my extremely busy day to learn coding, learn Python, learn Bash scripting to automate something? This is taking more time for me to develop this automation solution than it would be for me to go in and just configure it with commands. And so they would try to help drive the end goal why behind that. And that is because, you'd be developing a new skill if you learn, Python or Bash scripting or something, which would actually end up making your product deployed faster in the future. And as you learn more about programming, you get quicker with solutions for automating different types of deployments, and you start to come up with more ideas on how to automate that. And it's not even just the automation and the efficiency of getting the product out there, but it's also dispelling any kind of mistakes that are made along the way, because you have consistency built into your deployments through automation that can remove a lot of human error. Some of their responsibilities include budgeting, performance reviews, career development, and specific functional skills development of staff, hiring, and capacity planning. So they would really help out with getting training for development types of aspects into your DevOps transformation, where that might be an area lacking, which I think it might be pretty common in the networking space, is that we need more of those kind of developer mindsets there. Now we have the kernel team. I love this idea. I love this. I got this terminology from the first source on my list, from the article, The 4 Roles of DevOps Leadership by Anton Weiss. And I think it's so cool because you think about a kernel. What is a kernel in computer software? A kernel connects the application software to the computer hardware. So you think like CPU, memory, etc., those types of things. They're like the bridge between the software and the hardware. And I kind of like to think of the kernel team. It's like the bridge between the developers and the operations team. They're able to kind of go between both of those spaces. Who they are, they're a group of skilled technical leaders who support the transformation. They coach and lead by example. They coordinate activities with their teams with a big picture in mind of, hey, this is where we're going and this is why, and it's going to be really great, and it's going to help us in the long run. And they'll be backed and incentivized to cooperate together and with the transformational leaders. In exchange, they'll escalate the big picture of the direction that the organization is and should be moving in. Some of their responsibilities, they're subject matter experts. They fully understand and contribute to the architecture, design, and development of the CI/CD infrastructure and all of its workflows. So they have an understanding of all of the different build and release pipelines, all of the repositories, all of the code that goes into making the entire, in our case, Azure DevOps CI/CD infrastructure. They perform in-depth testing and development in preparation for a product's release. They determine what kinds of specific tools are needed for the CI/CD workflows. And they have a vision for automating all those manual, repeatable processes, which, that can end up evolving into an ADO feature or story that you end up, adding to your backlog, which is part of that backlog refinement that a development side of DevOps kind of partakes in. They're highly collaborative, both within their network teams and also with many other different kinds of teams, like cloud landing zones, core services. So those are people that maybe be working on, different kinds of core services that the company needs to function through automation. And so on across the entire organization. They lead, guide, and mentor junior DevOps engineers on all of the CI/CD processes. So what is the number one goal in DevOps transformation? Network DevOps transformation. Our number one goal, I like this quote, again, by Anton Weiss, from that source I just mentioned. The ultimate goal of DevOps transformation is arriving at the self-organizing system in which teams collaborate effectively simply because that's how things are done, simply because they trust, understand, and respect each other. This is a beautiful vision, as beautiful as a large code base with 0 bugs. Anton Weiss, principal consultant and CEO at Automato. So a lot of advice that I've received about, how do you do DevOps? Like, how do you get there? And especially, how do you transform a traditional operations team like the network team into a DevOps team? And over, what I've researched and what I've heard from colleagues is that, this doesn't happen overnight. And I feel like that is just one of the best points that I've heard and seen. The fact of the matter is that it does take a lot of time, and effort needs to be put in by everyone involved within like the network teams. So you've got like support teams, you've got, design folks, architects, all of those highly technical or kernel teams, I guess you could call them. They need to be, engaged and wanting to pursue this transformation in addition to the transformational leadership team. So your management teams, in order to be successful. So because of the background to this, because we're trying to design this from the ground up, one of the mottos we had while working through this project together and getting this ADO CI/CD architecture to take off was baby steps. Sometimes we would be working on something in a session for hours, and we would see little progress, and we'd finally inch forward, and we would just be like baby steps. And I just feel like that's really good advice so that you don't lose sight of your end goal, which is to get to that self-organizing system where teams collaborate effectively and they trust and respect each other. That helped, the baby steps that really helped us keep going and knowing, and driving us forward and knowing that the end result at the end of the day would all be worth it. So now we're going to kind of get into those technical specific roles that we kind of talked about in our call. And these are different DevOps lead roles. And, I'm not saying that I everything is, 100% here. And to be honest, I think that depending on the team you're on, not everybody's going to fit into each one of these roles 100%. I think that, especially I think in our case, I think we kind of end up wearing multiple hats here and kind of sharing these hats around the group with who kind of does what with these very specific roles. So first off here, we'll talk about the development lead. So a development lead, that is somebody who is like a step above a software developer. They have that background. They were once developers themselves. They're in the midpoint path between being a developer and being like a solutions architect. So you could think of like in the cloud space, like a cloud landing zone. You've got, different types of teams. You've got the landing zone team, which is kind of supporting and deploying cloud infrastructure, and also a little bit of design there too. But you've also got the solutions architects teams, which they're architecting and designing out, solutions for their customers. So these guys, these development leads, they kind of sit in the middle of those two groups. They're rooted in the reality of the code, and they understand the capabilities of their developers that are working on certain projects. So they could really spec out, the requirements for, let's just say for an ADO story. They can really go through in and define the acceptance criteria to get that particular project done and completed successful. They lead and mentor junior developers through problems that they might not have enough experience to fully understand. And in a lot of different organizations, the development lead isn't necessarily somebody that is like focused on being a like people manager. You're still going to be working with, your engineers, but you won't really have that formal administrative type of role of managing employees. Instead, you're really focusing more on the technical side of helping your developers be successful. You've got a test automation lead. This is a software developer type of role, responsible for turning new requirements into code. So really part of that whole, like in the beginning, we talked about what is DevOps, the development side of that. It kind of fits into this, as do most of these roles. But really, like these guys are kind of taking in requirements for a particular project or a solution design, and then they're working on building it out or templating it out. Writing the code that would make it work, and testing it, and doing validations, identifying any bugs, and creating like an ADO story with and defining it as a bug to fix that. And then you've got your DevOps lead. This is somebody who completely understands the entire CI/CD infrastructure that you have. They're going to have very deep level knowledge of all the different repositories that you're managing, all the different build and release pipelines and how they hook together with your repositories and what you're trying to do, and any documentation along the way. They're going to handle the entire DevOps lifecycle. They design, develop scaling strategies, automation scripts, and solutions to implement, streamline, and execute the software. They have sound knowledge of various tools and technologies used by not only their team, but other team members. And, there's somebody that would have that subject matter expert experience with tools to know when they can use the tools that they have, or when it might be a value add to maybe invest in a different tool or build a new tool to accomplish something. They're liable for automating all of the manual tasks for developing and deploying code and data to implement continuous deployment and continuous integration frameworks. So CI/CD right there all across the board with a DevOps lead. They're responsible for creating software and deployment strategies. And obviously with the tooling comment I made, I mean, they have to stay abreast of all the different industry trends going on and best practices by constantly doing research and testing out new technologies. So those were the three main roles. Again, like I said, I'm not saying this is 100%. That these roles have to be this way and that you have to be locked into a particular role. But this just gives you a really good idea to understand, who might be doing what and wearing what kind of hat along in your DevOps transformation process. So next thing we'll talk about here is the path to a successful DevOps transformation. What does that look like? Value and understand our people. In unsuccessful DevOps initiatives, the organization fails to realize that people are the most important component of the equation. These organizations often assign members to their new DevOps teams before they have fully understood and documented both the soft and technical skills required for a high-performing DevOps team. They fail to realize that not all personnel have the acumen or desire necessary for success in a highly fluid and collaborative environment. Gary Latow, VP of Capgemini North America. I think that's a really great quote to understanding and respecting your people, valuing your people as you're on this path to a DevOps transformation. DevOps is, it's a term, it's exciting, it's something that a lot of people want and not everybody can easily have just instantaneously. As I've mentioned before, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes effort by everybody involved. And while somebody on your team might be very excited about it and think that they would be good at it, or there could even be people that don't want to do it or they're not interested in going in that direction. It's really important, I think, especially for the transformational leadership team, to really understand their people, that they manage to see who might fit in this DevOps transformation, who might be a good fit for those kernel team type roles. Moving forward, rather than just assuming that everybody is on board and interested. I think that's a really great quote that kind of summarizes that aspect of it. It's really valuing and understanding your people. Another point to make with that is that, you want to have a clear understanding of the roles, responsibilities, and capabilities of everyone on your different teams. And you want to make sure that you remove any type of disconnect from the reality of the work that folks on the kernel team and those that they support do, or you won't have that success. It's not easy. DevOps is exciting, but it's not easy, and it's not like somebody comes in and flips the switch on and everything just works. You've got your CI/CD infrastructure. It takes time and it takes effort. And then next, teamwork makes the dream work. Once you've got your folks down that you're like, all right, these are engineers, they're on board, they've got interest, and they've got drive. They're learning scripting, they're learning how to use Git. They know how to do branching and making code updates, and they know how to navigate through the wikis and the documentation. And they're doing that training on the side to understand all the different DevOps terminology and the different tool sets. So teamwork makes the dream work. I love saying this. It's one of my favorite phrases that I say. With DevOps culture, you want to cultivate a culture of sharing and learning and experimentation. You want to make sure you have open lines of communication where everybody feels comfortable to ask questions. It's very highly collaborative, moving into DevOps transformation and beyond. Once you've got it going, I mean, you're constantly going to be collaborating within your team and possibly other teams as well. DevOps is a team sport, and when things go wrong, everyone steps in to make it right. Nobody gets blamed or shamed for missing something. No one wants to look bad. If they know that they'll be shamed for making a mistake, they're going to shut down and all of your DevOps gains will be lost. So you want to make sure you have a culture that nobody's blamed for when a mistake does happen, and that everybody comes in and is like, no big deal. We'll get this right and we'll fix it quickly and we'll move on. We're going to climb that mountain together and we're going to have success to get to the top. And you want to create a culture that celebrates wins and forgives and forgets losses. So in my experience, with this presentation, we were coming up on preparing for that the whole purpose of the network DevOps transformation was, and putting together that CI/CD infrastructure was, we're going to deploy a cloud firewall solution to all of our various landing zones that we support. And you could call that in DevOps terminology, you could call that a pilot program in a DevOps transformation. So this pilot program, the goal of it was to have a win. And that was the approach that we've been taking. It's more of a graceful method into transitioning the teams into DevOps by using this pilot program. And so our desire was to be successful in that and to really encourage and inspire our teams that, this is a possibility for us, that, a traditionally operations network team can actually go the route of DevOps. And so that worked out really well for us to approach it in that perspective. And it really was the only feasible approach for us, and it most likely will be for the majority of companies, unless you've got the funding where you can really get that support in to have like a radical DevOps transformation, like a much more sudden shift versus a more gradual approach like we did to using this pilot program. And so, and again, it goes back to like boiling down to that it does take time. Nobody can flip on a switch and make it happen overnight. And it's just all about being patient with the process and continuing to take those baby steps into success. So what's next? What's next in the DevOps transformation? What's a good place to go after this? You could see this presentation as kind of like an entry point into what your transformation might look like. So these are just some suggestions that I had for next steps. I think that stand-ups are great. I've been on teams where they have stand-ups every day with different cloud teams, and I've been on, cloud networking teams where it's been, maybe every other day. And just kind of depending on what's going on, what kind of projects are coming down the pipe, you could decide, within your specific kernel teams or your highly technical teams, what you need. If you need that daily or every other day stand up, or maybe you just need a weekly cadence. My suggestion here was possibly doing a weekly stand up or touch base between those members of the kernel team. So that would have been myself, like a more highly technical person, as I helped with the design of the ADO CI/CD infrastructure. So I knew all the technical pieces and the tools that we were using, and I was part of, training and giving demos to the network support teams that we were going to have on board with deployments. And then, so that would be our kernel team, and then meeting with, those transformational leaders, those who were managing, folks on my team, and then managing folks on the different network support teams that we were going to be working with and the ones that we've been training. So we wanted to maybe have a touch base, like ensuring that we were, really understanding and communicating each other's processes. making sure that there wasn't any kind of a disconnect, that we were on, the same path forward to that successful transformation. And then determining if there's anything that we need to support each other as we progress. Any recommended trainings or recommended different kinds of calls or documentation or processes or whatever it would be, that we would get those sorted out. And I was thinking, this shouldn't be focused, specifically on technical pieces, but more about like processes and procedures and project requirements. We want to focus on those roadblocks right on the train track, so that we're not blocking the train from moving forward. We want to get rid of those blockages in order to have a successful transformation. Talk about possible training, budgeting, and capacity across our teams. And then also ensuring, just to summarize, that with all these things, the above bullet points, that we don't have a disconnect from the reality of our work, and that we're understanding each other, where we're investing our time and the reasons why. And then I think it's always an excellent idea to have very strong open communication pathways. One of the groups we had kind of created was a network cloud leads group, and that's a group of members where like if you submit a PR in ADO, and we also put a lock on it where it required at least 2 approvals from leads in that group in order to merge the pull request. So I think that's great. Like if you've got a group of leads, or if you pick one person, I've worked with teams where they have just that one person who's kind of their development lead, and he'll be the one that approves all the PRs. Or if you have like a small group of folks like this, you can set up locks, checks and balances, on your repositories, and who's allowed to like review and approve both pull requests and also release pipelines. We did set up, approvals on our release pipelines as well, which I think is great, especially with working with such folks that are so new at the whole DevOps idea. Also suggested creating maybe an email distribution list that different members of the company can email if they have questions about the tooling that we're using. I mean, you don't want to hear like when it's too late, or that somebody decided to get rid of Azure DevOps, or they're retiring Azure DevOps and deciding to move to GitHub instead, or something like that, or your favorite tool that you've got ingrained in all of your CI/CD infrastructure is going away. You need to be, a contact in your company for those types of decisions. Another idea I had was, like Microsoft Teams having a channel for questions, and that could be opened up to like the wider company, or maybe just your smaller group, and people can ask you, or at least just members of your network teams can reach out and ask you questions rather than pinpointing a specific person. You've got like members of your network cloud leads group involved, and they can all engage, and then everybody else is watching and learning together as you go. And then I also suggested, a ServiceNow group, or whatever your ticketing system is, having a specific group there to manage tickets, whether it's incidents or specific kinds of requests or what have you. Yep. And then questions. So, obviously I don't have folks on the call with me, but feel free to drop any questions that you have down below. The presentation I put together was very open. We were able to just, stop and discuss things along the way. And I highly recommend that. That is part of the DevOps culture. That's part of the open lines of communication, feeling comfortable to reach out and ask questions and say, hey, maybe, I don't know about that idea, but what do you think about this? And being open to that kind of criticism as well. It's very healthy in a DevOps environment, and especially a DevOps transformation. And then these are my sources. This is where I got the majority of information in my bullet points. Feel free to take a look. I thought they were very helpful. And then that is it. Thank you so much for listening to my Network DevOps Transformation call. You can find me at www.jennaspratler.com. That site is my personal resume, and I've got links to all the other places you see here, like LinkedIn and my GitHub repository out on jennaspratler.com, and my YouTube channel as well, and my Jenna's Runbooks technical blog. So thanks for joining me on this Network DevOps Transformation, and all the best to you and your transformation into DevOps. And again, feel free to drop your comments and questions. I'd love to hear the process that you are going through with your DevOps transformation in the YouTube comments below.